He turned and took a hypodermic from his bag. Let me do this blood test, then we'll see. All right? All right, doctor, and thank you for telling me the truth. It was more than an hour later when Andy Gray, their neighbor, appeared in the doorway. Hello, Laurie, he said. I hope I didn't startle you. Hello, Mr. Gray. Laurie looked up. He seemed distraught and worried as he came in. Is anything wrong? At your place, I mean. A sudden fear seized her that maybe his horses had been stricken. No, he shook his head. No, not a thing. How is he now? About the same. She looked down. He's been sleeping. I think his fever is down a little. I don't know really. It's a very great shame. His faint Scotch burr was soft with concern. Your father and the doctor are down at the stables, Laurie. They'd like to talk with you if you wouldn't mind my staying with him a bit. Laurie walked away slowly across the fields. The sun was intensely warm, and a few castled clouds had begun to build on the horizon. It was almost certain what they would tell her. Storm was going to die. Dr. Herrick had said as much already. Still, she could not believe it. The words were only words. Her mind would never admit them to reality. It was today, and Storm was sick. But tomorrow soon he would be well. There must be a way. Her father and Dr. Herrick were talking in Storm's stall. As she hesitated in the stable doorway, their voices drifted back to her. Scrub thoroughly with disinfectant, Dr. Herrick was saying. Harness, stalls, floor, feed box, everything. Carry combs, brushes, blankets, any personal equipment it would be best to burn. The blood drained from Laurie's heart. His words could mean only one thing. Her father knocked his pipe out against his hand as she approached. She had never known him to look so tired, so worn and pale. I have something here I would like you to see, Laurie. Dr. Herrick took over quietly. He lifted a wire rack from the feed box and held it up to the window. In it were two test tubes, one bright red, the other pale and watery. I guess I don't have to tell you that this one, he indicated the pale column, is Storm's blood. The other is from a healthy animal. He paused. There's the whole story, Laurie. Then there's nothing you can do? She asked suddenly calm. There's no known treatment, Dr. Herrick said, carefully. Not yet, at least. So I'm going to ask you to take my place, Laurie. I want you to be the doctor from now on. I don't understand. Her voice faltered. Did he mean there was somewhere a shadow of hope? Dr. Herrick's voice interrupted her whirling thoughts. If Storm recovers from this attack, which he might have days, even a few weeks, no one can say for sure. He will never be entirely well again. But he might exist until the next attack, or the next. Then he won't have to be destroyed. Well, Dr. Herrick hesitated. I've already explained the considerable danger to your other horses, but there's no law that says Storm must be destroyed. He paused. That is what I want you to decide. Laurie looked desperately at her father, but his gaze was fastened on the window. It was all so bewildering. Her father turned at last. There's one other thing, Laurie, he said. Something Dr. Herrick hasn't explained to you. But he hasn't been doing considerable experimental work on this particular disease, trying to find something that will really kill the virus that causes it and be a true cure. It's extremely important work. Their eyes met and held, and suddenly clearly she understood. Now she knew what Dr. Herrick had meant when he had asked her to be the doctor. She turned to him. You want to destroy Storm, then? She said slowly. He nodded. Not only for my work, Laurie, but in every way as a doctor, I think it would be best. Would it help other horses? If you took Storm now, I mean. Would it really help you to find a cure? The word slipped out almost against her will. It's like a chain, Laurie. Each new case is a link. But no one can say where the chain will end. That's how it is. I see. It was so unreal, as though they were discussing some scientific animal she didn't know at all. Even here, in the very stall where Storm had grown up, his presence was strong, and yet somehow remote, like the Storm she had run after in her dream. Don't try to decide now, Laurie. Her father's voice, too, seemed far off. Why don't you take a little walk outside? Think about it. Whatever you decide will be best. You know that. She glanced up gratefully. How could he always sense when she was on the verge of tears? All right, Dad. I'll be all right in a minute. She walked swiftly from the stall and ran toward the bright patch of day framed by the doorway. Outside, the sun caught her up in all its brilliance. The sky was filling swiftly with clouds, great turreted ships adrift on a turbulent blue sea. In every way, as a doctor, I think it would be best. It wasn't fair. He was asking her to think of Storm as just another sick animal, not as someone she knew and loved. If Storm had to go, he should go there among familiar things in his own way, close to people who loved him. Storm had a great heart. He wouldn't be afraid when the time came, even if he knew he wouldn't be afraid at all. The thought turn slipped away and drifted back. If he knew. She hadn't thought of it in that way. How could Storm feel if he was the one that had to decide? Not afraid, that was sure, but would he want to wait for death to come, or would he want to go as he had lived, plunging out to meet it, gallantly, recklessly, trying to outtrace the wind? Dr. Herrick wouldn't lie. He was sure Storm had only days at best. Painful days with intervals of dull relief, until at last he slipped away on an adventure she could not share. And in her heart, did she have any right to hold him, to lengthen his suffering, only because she could not bear to lose him? A gust of wind blew sharp and cold against her face. She looked up, startled. The clouds were massing swiftly now, sending dark, streaming shadows across the grass. A rumble of thunder sounded its warning in the sky. Her breath caught. They would have to hurry. Within an hour the storm was bound to break in all its fury. Laurie lay wide awake against the pillow, listening to the drums of thunder and rain crashing against the roof. Her arms and legs ached with weariness, but she could not sleep. There was so much to remember of this day, to make a part of memory forever. The sudden storm coming in and sweeping like swift, dark wings across the earth, and Storm himself, who would now give all storms their meaning. He had gone so quietly, as though he understood, and was glad. And it was best, of course. Storm had given his life, but in giving it he might restore life to unknown generations of his kind. Even if the search took years, they would find a way. And she would always remember him, not as he was when the sickness came, but as he had been on that last unforgettable ride. She turned restlessly toward the window. In its black depths you could almost see the shadow of the angry clouds twisting in the sky. Storm would have loved this night. The door opened quietly, and Laurie looked up in alarm. It was her father. Clad in still dripping slicker, he was carrying a hurricane lantern in his hand. "Dad," Laurie sat up in panic. "What's the matter? Is one of the other horses sick?" "No," he reassured her. "I just came from Andy Gray's," he explained. "I thought I'd take a chance that you would still be awake." "What's happened?" she whispered. He seemed so excited, with the tiredness completely gone from his face. "Andy called just after you had gone to bed," he said. "You remember when he came over this afternoon? Well, I didn't like to tell you then, but that mare of his was getting restless." His hands grew as cold as ice. "Which mare, Dad?" "There's only one I would waken you to tell you about tonight, Laurie." He smiled. "It's probably wouldn't have happened for 3 or 4 days in the normal course of things, but when the storm started she got frightened, and things started moving fast." "Dad," Laurie seized his arm. Not, that's right," he grinned at her. "Storm's son. He was born less than an hour ago." He looked down at her. "You don't know how I wanted to help you by telling you about it this afternoon, Laurie. I'm glad I didn't now. Andy wanted you to know. Storm's colt is yours, of course." She stared up at him, still not able to believe it. Then at last, after the long day of holding back her tears came. She looked away out toward the raging night, but her hand crept into his as a tremendous flash of lightning illuminated the sky and the earth and vanished into blackness before the thunder came.